Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining everybody for another Tuesday discussion. And here this Tuesday, I am going to give a video response to Chris over at Bourbon of the Week. He set out a video just this past week. I'll put a link in the description so you can see where this all originated. But what he wanted to do was essentially dispel any misconceptions about how people may be acquiring their unicorn bottles, just so people can know how these bottles came in the possession of so many different collections. So, what I'm going to do today is go through some of the unicorn bottles that I have, how I acquired them, and really we got to talk about even what is a unicorn these days. Because I think the definition of what a unicorn is ever changing. Maybe it's just due to the market today. Maybe it's due to my own opinions of where I am on the bourbon journey. But that was even one of the challenges I had going into this response. What the heck is a unicorn? So we'll discuss it all. Thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. What we're going to discuss first is what the heck is a unicorn bottle these days? I think it's kind of difficult. I mean, BTAC, yeah, easy to stand out. Some of the Heaven Hill releases, I think you'd still call them unicorns, but I don't know. I really wasn't impressed with the sample of Heaven Hill 18 I got. So does it require to be good to be a unicorn, or does it just have to be rare? Does it just have to be sought after? Something that causes FOMO in others that haven't tried it before and don't have it? I don't know. I think the definition there is pretty loose, and it does feel different pre-2020 versus post-2020. I mean, what is a unicorn simply feels different. A, taking you back to pre-2020, maybe you weren't into bourbon before then, and frankly, any bourbon collector that's been in this game is probably going to have some year where the dam broke and everything changed. So for me, it's 2020. What changed in 2020? A few things changed. The bourbon market really took off. And around 2020, it seemed like stores and brands figured out they could ask more and more out of the bourbon community and started getting prices closer to what we see in the Scotch world versus what we saw in the bourbon world prior. So getting your hands on something just became more and more expensive rather than a game of luck, chance, and some of the various reasons that we're going to go through in a minute. Post 2020 as well, it seemed like all the brands figured out oh, we got to have these limited editions. Like there were really only a few tent poles that were coming out every year before that. Whereas now it's like every brand needs to have their special release for the year and they want to call it a unicorn. So just being limited doesn't mean unicorn. There is no special number, whether it's 500 bottles, 1,000 bottles, 10,000 bottles. It really doesn't matter. Personally, I think it has to do with either personal preference or just the hype. I was recently at Bourbon in the Barn, which is a Bourbon Junkies event, and we did a bottle share. And I was even thinking of the bottles that I was gravitating around as my definition of a unicorn. You know, if it's a bottle that catches my eye, hey, that must be a unicorn then. It's causing me FOMO, it's causing me curiosity. But the range of things that I got to try were things like the Master's Key Triumph, some Old Forester President's Choice, the King of Kentucky. Got to sample that one, strangely, in a pool. Then thinking about some other bottles that were there that are more obscure. There was a 15-year single barrel from Traverse City that was Indiana. 15-year Indiana, don't get that very often. And then there was another one that was a 13-year Heaven Hill that spent a portion of its life over in Scotland and then came back. And immediately upon seeing that, I had to try that. That sounds like a unicorn. Even had the brininess and everything. I'm going to be thinking about that pour for a while. I kind of need to hunt down a bottle of that now that I say it out loud. But we're going to take a step back because when it comes to my own personal collection and where I've had the luck, it really is in that pre-2020 era And a lot of bottles that may be considered unicorns in my collection by most people are things that have been in my collection for a handful of years back when it was quote unquote easier to get your hands on things. Nowadays, my definition is much different. You know all the reviews we do on the channel. I'm just into obscure brands. I'm into single barrels. I'm into finding where the value is today versus maybe doing a lot of hunting or anything on secondary. So, my best luck was finding unicorns between the years of 2017 and 2020. The way that I typically acquired these bottles was either through lotteries, online stores, secondary, or pure luck. Right place, right time. Also, have some local whiskey friends. And back then, it was more about, I don't know, you'd be able to go into stores and find things on a more regular basis. And you might not find the things that you wanted. You might find something that your friend wanted. So what I would do was I would buy something, and maybe if I had a backup of it, I would reach out to a friend and we would then do a trade for something they have a backup on. And that's how I got to try a whole lot of things. And that is how I got my hands on Old Forester uh, birthday bourbon here. This is the 2019 edition, the only one of these that I've ever had. So as you can see here, been nursing it for quite some time. Probably got about halfway. It looks about 40% of the bottle left there. But this one traded a friend an E.H. Taylor barrel proof that they were looking for a particular batch on. The other way I would acquire bottles in that era, and that's going to apply to Michter's Toasted Barrel Rye and also the Jack Daniel's Coy Hill. There was a store by me that had a very reasonable point system. So for every dollar I spent in the store, I could go out and look on their shelves when they put bottles out for the point system. And if I had 500 points accumulated, which essentially meant that I spent $500 in a 6-month period, I could get that bottle. And really, when they first started out the point system, all these bottles were like 200 points, 300 points, 400 points, 500 points. It wasn't too hard to acquire points through either buying wine, buying beer, buying their picks, buying all the whiskeys that I was really getting into back when I started it and I started playing Pokemon. I wanted to try everything. I always concentrated all of my spending on that store. That way I could cash in my points. But eventually, that point system just went out of range, just like so many other things that I'm talking about here with the prices. The same bottle that used to cost 500 points suddenly cost 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 points. There was simply no way I could work my way up to get that many points. And thus, it just kind of dried up for me. And I stopped giving said stores as much as my business thereafter because there was less incentive to do it. There was no way to acquire the points in order to get the bottles that I wanted. The last thing that I'll note here, and this was just me maybe being ahead of the curve or getting into something and knowing what I was into before others, but I have quite a few MGP single barrels left. If you see me at Bottle Shares, I usually have some old MGP from this era in my bag. This one here is a pick from Go Big Blue Liquors. Seen this one passed around quite a bit lately, even. Never ever going to move these. I don't care what the prices are. This is my favorite era. I have about 6 to 8 MGP single barrels, either under OKI, Boone County, Joseph Magnus. I was collecting them left and right. And even at the time when we talk about doing any like local trades, just 1-for-1 trades, if I got my hands on a Buffalo Trace product, let's say a Stag Junior, I trade it off for an MGP single barrel. I mean, that's just how I collected all those. For me, it was just about accumulating what I loved. And at the time, and still is technically, MGP was my favorite distillery. So I would get those left and right. And I'll be quite frank, before they dried up in 2020, when the MGP single barrels, all the old single barrels dried up, I was drinking those like a fish. I mean, those were just my daily. I had to have a new perspective on what I had in my collection at some point there, because those were just my normal pours. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'll never get these again. Thus the unicorn status. So that's the pre 2020 era. Those would be the main ways. Oh, lotteries. I didn't mention lotteries here, but I do live in Ohio. So I can do some lottery hits. Weller 12 would be an example of that, of how I got that bottle. That was mainly through Ohio and just playing the lottery, signing up, getting lucky. I've got a few stores by me that still do that. I'll sign up. If it happens, it happens. So let's reset here, for more modern era, the things that I'm into, the things that I consider unicorns. And maybe it's a little bit of a different definition, but I am really into single barrels, off profile single barrels that make me smile, unique experiences, unique finishes, things that frankly, that might be a one and done my entire life. I may never taste something like that ever again. One of those I got in my glass right now. Absolutely love it. But this is coming from Two Souls. This is a pumpernickel rye that they sourced from Ohio, from Middle West, but they double barreled it in another rye cask. And it's so spicy and it's so dark and it's so off profile. And I've been getting some really cool stuff from Two Souls, awaiting a release. It should be in even this week. That was Green River cast strength rye, triple finished. Finished in 3 casks. Those are the type of things that I get into. Another cool release that I got my hands on recently, I guess this would fit more in the lotteries, is the new Riff Headliner. Now, do I absolutely love this bottle? It was a little expensive for $250. Half of it went to charity. But what it represents when it comes to being such a New Riff fan is just so fun. This is a New Riff blend that contains 10-year-old bourbon, 9-year-old bourbon, 9-year-old rye whiskey. So the oldest things that they've ever created. It's also got some sherry finished 7-year single malt in this blend. Is it making my top 10 list for the year? No, it's right outside of that. But there's 697 of them. And I got my hands on one, and I am a big New Riff mark. They are right in my backyard since I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. That is a unicorn to me, supporting a local distillery that really is doing a lot of good things. The last one that I'll highlight here, once again, just as an example of why I hunt these single barrels, but I got a copper and cask single barrel right here. This is one that Durrell had a hand in picking. It was also my favorite pour of 2023. It is a 8-year MGP bourbon finished in a Weller foolproof barrel. Who the heck is doing that? Barrel King does some of that, but other than Barrel King, who else does these things? Not many people. That's a unicorn to me. One and done. And now that this bottle's done, though, now as I'm flipping it around, I'm like, ooh, there's a couple drops left in there. But yes, those one and done things. That's my new definition of a unicorn, and those are the things that I support. So just a few last points here, and I'll wrap up this video because I know I'm going a little long. But generally speaking, when it comes to all my hunting in 2024, I've let the whiskey find me versus me hunting the whiskey. I don't have that habit of stopping in every store anymore. I just kind of got dejected on the fact that, hey, if I do see something, there's probably a reason that it's on the shelf, and it's because the price is 10 times higher than it should be. So I got out of the habit of going to the stores constantly. I just enter whatever lotteries I can online, do whatever I can do, hunting maybe some websites online, but more or less it either comes to me or it doesn't, which is also why I am in so many of the groups, especially in this community. I support as many of them as I can, because those are, once again, what I find being the unicorns, those single barrels. Those groups have gotten probably 80% of the share of my whiskey budget supporting those groups, but they're also going around picking such unique things, hitting up new brands and having some of the oldest casts they've ever released. There's all those type of things that are going on in all the groups in the community here, and supporting them year after year after year really has been my source of unicorns the last couple of years. So that is how I've gotten so many of my bottles. Curious to know how you get your bottles and your unicorns. Do you stand in line? Do you go to the whiskey release events? Maybe you're close enough to Kentucky to stand in line and camp out at Heaven Hill and get to hang out with people and do those type of experiences. Totally curious. And to wrap this up, just like Chris, I am going to nominate 5 channels to keep this going. I want you to tell us how you acquired some of your unicorn bottles in your collection today. So I'm going to challenge David and Jamie over at Whiskey Row and Beyond the Row, Trev, the Bourbon Wrench, my tag team champion partner, David and Kira, thewhiskeychannel.com, Marty, the Whiskey Knows, see you soon, buddy, and Stacy, 4 Leaf Whiskey. Totally curious what Stacy's going to say about all of her Irish and what the unicorn definition is of an Irish whiskey. Totally curious for her perspective. So thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. Once again, hit me up in the comments, hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next Tuesday discussion. Goodbye, everybody.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say